Hi, I'm Joel Thomas. You may remember me from such grammar presentations as Your Friend, the colon, and Commas, Commas Everywhere. Welcome to yet another Writing 1 presentation. To follow along with this presentation, you'll want to have your pocket-style manual open. I'll make references of a couple of places, and those will be posted in the slides as well that you can look and. First, let's define fragment a little bit. A fragment is a word group that pretends to be a sentence, but is not actually a complete sentence. So why do we care about fragments so much? Why are they so frightening if we want to follow the theme of this ridiculous monster movie title that I put on this thing? Well, fragments are problematic for two reasons. Number one, they can cause confusion for the reader. And you can see in the examples that they have there on 238, where they start reading a sentence like, when the cat leaped onto the table, or running for the bus, or and immediately popped their flares and life vests. And we see the second part there, they're incomplete thoughts. But that's confusing for the reader too, because the reader is going to wonder where the rest of it is, or what you're really trying to say there. So you want to avoid fragments, and when I run across them in your writing, I'll be sure to point them out to you so you can correct them. Let's look at this handy test for fragments. We can look at this and ask ourselves these questions if we're not sure if something is a fragment or not. So we look at the first box. Is there a verb? Well, if there's not a verb, no, it's a fragment. Is there a subject? No, it's a fragment. So we see that. So we can choose, is there a verb? No, it's a fragment. Yes. Go on to the next question. Is there a subject? If the answer is no, then okay, it's a fragment. If the answer to that is yes, then it gets a little bit more complicated. And that's why we had the previous presentation about sentence parts, and I wanted you to be able to know what we mean by a subordinate clause here when we got to this part. So we've answered these two questions. Yes, we see a verb, we see a subject. So we ask ourselves, is the word group merely a subordinate clause because it begins with a word such as because or when? Remember, we have that whole list of words that we can look at. And if the answer is yes, okay, it's a fragment. If the answer is no, it's not that word group, okay, it's a sentence. So again, this is a handy guide, especially if you struggle with fragments and have them in your papers. This is a good guide. This is also something to come back to when you look through your paper and you see comments, and I have marked a couple of fragments and you're not really sure why. You can look at this guide, and if you do have questions, you can always contact me as well. One other thing that you should know about our book gets into this a little bit here and there. You can look it up in the index if you want to find some more information here. But the idea of a verbal is basically when it looks like a verb and it seems like it would be a verb, but it's actually taking action as another part of speech. So for example, it's a verb that acts like a noun or an adjective or adverb. Here's an example. Broken promises cannot be fixed. Well, that's a word, broken, that often we think of as a verb, but here it's acting as an adjective. It's describing promises. Another one is complaining. Well, again, complaining is usually a verb, or complain, being the root word, would be a verb. But here, complaining is the subject of the sentence, is acting as a noun. Complaining, and then the verb is becomes, then wearisome. So we see these acting as adjectives, nouns, and then as an adverb, can you wait? And then the adverb being here, to celebrate. Now the verb in this sentence is wait, subject is you, and then we have a helping verb can. And so to celebrate is an adverb basically going along with the verb describing wait to what. So we see here again things that are normally verbs, verb forms that are being used as other parts of speech. Sometimes we get confused, and most of us are aware of verbals. This is not a new concept for most people who have used the English language, even if you couldn't really explain it or don't know all the technical words. But what happens then is we get confused on which is which, and we end up with sentences like this example, missing the ball. Well, this is an incomplete thought. Again, it could mean any number of things because we don't really know. We don't have all the information we need. We don't have an actual subject here, and we can use this maybe as a verb, but we're not sure because we don't have the complete sentence. So just be aware of this. Again, this would fall into the realm of a phrase, probably, rather than a clause that we've talked about before, but this is something that can affect sentence fragments. Sometimes remember that our subject of the sentence could be you understood. So if I say, open the door, well, the subject is you. I didn't say you open the door, but it's understood. You understand what I'm saying there. You understood what the subject is. And also keep in mind that a sentence may open with a subordinate clause, but the sentence must also include an independent clause. And again, we talked about that in the other presentation. So that's something to watch out for. And what sometimes people do is they'll have what should be one sentence, but it's broken into two. So just combine those together if you run into that situation. So if you find fragments, there are some ways that you can revise them, and we're going to look at an example of that next. One is to attach the fragment to a nearby sentence, and that's what I was just referring to. Another is to just rewrite the fragment as a complete sentence. So let's look at an example. This example is not in your book. There are many fine examples in the Hacker book. This one's actually from How to Write Anything because they already had it designed for a presentation, so we're going to use that one. Let's look at this here. Okay, so looking at the fragment fix examples, and these are actually kind of in the opposite order of the screen that we just saw about either hooking two sentences together or about totally rewriting it. So we'll look at the totally rewriting it first one. And you can see that usually it isn't a case of totally rewriting it. We're just adding one word. So rather than saying the old aluminum boat sitting on its trailer, and again, I see some sentences like that. Sentences can be tricky, and sometimes when we write them, we automatically put that was in there without actually writing it. So in this case, we're just going to add was, and it's all good because now we have sitting on its trailer. Well, sitting is the key word here, and that is a verbal. And the way it's written without was, just sitting on its trailer would be describing boat. But when we add was, then we actually have a verb in there that works. It's a good, what we call a linking verb. Let's look at the second example where it's beginning with a subordinating word. And this is the type of example that I actually see in a lot of people's papers, so make sure you're looking at this one and pay attention to your own papers here. We often will have a student write, we returned to the drugstore, and they'll have a regular sentence, and that's a fine sentence. But then they'll add on another thought or something else that they want to throw in there, so they'll start a new sentence, where we waited for our buddies. Well, we see that word where, that's problematic. That tells us that we're beginning a subordinating clause. So we just go back, change the period to a comma, put a lowercase w for the where. We've got a longer sentence. It works out really well. And that's how we can fix fragments.